The silk was too heavy. That was the first thing Julian noticed, a thought so small and trivial it should have been drowned out by the roar of the morning, but instead, it anchored him. It was a cream-colored silk, hand-woven, the kind of fabric that cost more than his father's first car, and it felt like a shroud. He stood in front of the floor-to-ceiling mirror in the dressing room of the estate, the scent of expensive lilies and floor wax thick enough to taste. Outside, the world was humming with the machinery of a high-society wedding. He could hear the muffled sound of a string quartet tuning their instruments 3 floors down. He could hear the laughter of his cousins, the sharp, authoritative bark of his mother directing the caterers, and the distant, rhythmic thud of car doors closing as the first wave of guests arrived. He was 24 years old, and he was exactly where everyone had always told him he would be. He was the perfect omega, the jewel in the crown of a family that traded in reputation as much as they did in textiles. And in 45 minutes, he was supposed to walk down a long, flower-strewn aisle and give his life to Elias Thorne. Elias was a man who smelled of cedar wood, cold mountain air, and the kind of power that didn't need to raise its voice to be felt. He was a man who had never been anything but kind to Julian, in his own distant, gravitational way. They had been together for 2 years, and in those 730 days, Julian had never once said no. He had said yes to the first date. He had said yes to the move into Elias's penthouse. He had said yes to the ring, a diamond so large it felt like a weight he wasn't strong enough to carry. He had said yes because it was the correct thing to do. It was the path of least resistance. It was the way to make the people he loved happy. He looked at his reflection and didn't see a person. He saw a series of successful negotiations. He saw a well-maintained asset. His own scent, usually a soft, warm honey and white tea, was sharp today, souring at the edges with a metallic tang of anxiety that he had been ignoring for months. He reached up to adjust the collar of the silk shirt, and his fingers trembled. It wasn't the wedding he was afraid of. It wasn't Elias. It was the terrifying, hollow realization that if someone asked him why he was doing this, the only answer he had was because I was told to. He sat down on the edge of the velvet bench, his movements stiff. He thought about Elias. He thought about the way Elias looked at him, with a quiet sort of pride, the way a man looks at a rare painting he's finally acquired. Elias was a pillar of the community, a man of iron discipline who ran his family's shipping empire with a precision that bordered on the divine. He was a good man. He was a provider. He was everything an Omega was supposed to want. But as Julian sat there, the silence of the room began to press in on him. He realized he didn't know what Elias liked for breakfast when he wasn't trying to impress Julian. He realized he didn't know if he himself liked the lilies that were currently suffocating the hallway, or if he had just agreed to them because the florist said they were traditional. He had spent 24 years being a mirror, reflecting back the expectations of everyone around him. He was a ghost in his own life. The door clicked open, and his best man, Leo, stepped in, smelling of nervous peppermint and expensive gin. Leo stopped, his eyes sweeping over Julian's pale face. 10 minutes, Jules, Leo said, his voice dropping an octave. Every seated. Elias is at the altar. He looks like a man who's about to win. Julian looked up, and for the first time in his life, the reflection didn't move the way it was supposed to. He didn't smile. He didn't stand up and smooth his hair. He just looked at Leo and said, "I don't know who I am." Leo blinked, the humor draining from his face. "What?" Julian stood up, but he didn't move toward the door. He moved toward the window. "I've said yes to everything, Leo. Every single thing. From the shoes I'm wearing to the person I'm supposed to sleep next to for the rest of my life. I don't know if I want this. I don't know if I want anything. I'm a hollow space where a person should be." Leo took a step forward, his hand outstretched. "Jules, it's just nerves. Everyone feels like this. It's a big day." Julian shook his head, the movement violent. "No. It's not nerves. It's the truth. If I walk out there, I'm disappearing forever. I'll just be Mrs. Thorne. I'll be the Omega who kept the peace. And I'll never know if I actually loved him, or if I just loved being what he wanted." He looked at the service entrance in the courtyard below, a small, unassuming wooden door used by the staff. It was unguarded. It was an exit. He didn't think. If he thought, he would stay. If he thought, the weight of the expectations would crush him back into the mold. He grabbed his coat from the chair, a simple wool thing, not the wedding furs, and he ran. He didn't look back at Leo's shocked face. He didn't look at the flowers. He ran down the back staircase, his heart hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. He burst through the service door and into the cool morning air, the scent of damp earth and gasoline hitting him like a physical shock. He found his car in the far lot, the keys still in the pocket of the coat he'd worn to the rehearsal. He started the engine, the roar of it sounding like a scream in the quiet morning. He drove. He didn't have a plan. He didn't have a suitcase. He just had a tank of gas and a desperate, glowing need to find a version of himself that wasn't a performance. Back at the estate, the silence that followed the news was more deafening than any shout. Elias Thorne stood at the altar, his hands clasped behind his back, his posture perfect. He had been waiting for 7 minutes. He had smelled the shift in the air before Leo even reached him. The scent of Julian's honey and tea had vanished from the hallway, replaced by the cold, sharp scent of panic and distance. When Leo whispered the words into his ear, "He's gone, Elias." He left. Elias didn't move. He didn't flinch. His face remained a mask of calm, though the sandalwood scent that usually clung to him sharpened into something like ozone before a lightning strike. He stood there for exactly 4 minutes. The guests began to murmur, the sound rising like the tide. His mother approached him, her face a mask of social horror, but he held up a hand, a single, silent command that stopped her in her tracks. He took his phone from his pocket. He didn't call the police. He didn't call his security team to drag Julian back. He typed a single message, his thumb steady on the screen. "When you're ready, I'll be here. Take whatever time you need. I'm not angry." He hit send. Then, he turned to the room, his voice carrying to the very back row without the need for a microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen, there will be no wedding today. Please enjoy the reception. The food and drink are yours. I ask that you respect our privacy." He walked off the dais, his footsteps rhythmic and heavy on the marble. He went home to a penthouse that smelled of Julian's lingering tea and honey, and he sat in the dark for 3 hours, watching the city lights flicker to life. He was a man who had built an empire on knowing exactly what people wanted before they knew it themselves, yet he had missed the most fundamental truth of the man he loved, that Julian didn't know how to want it all. Julian drove until the city skyscrapers turned into rolling hills, and the hills turned into the jagged, salt-sprayed coastline of the north. He stopped in a town called Oakhaven, a place where the air smelled of rotting kelp and pine needles. He found a bed and breakfast called the Gables, run by a woman named Mrs. Gable who had flour on her apron and eyes that had seen everything. He checked in under his middle name. He had no luggage, only the expensive suit under his coat and the credit card he hoped Elias hadn't blocked. For the first 3 days, he did nothing but sleep. He slept until his bones felt heavy, a deep, dreamless exhaustion that felt like he was shedding a skin. On the 4th day, he sat by the window and watched the rain. He realized he didn't know what he wanted for breakfast. Mrs. Gable asked him, "Eggs or porridge, dear?" And he froze. He didn't know which one was the right answer. He didn't know which one made him seem more agreeable. He looked at her, his voice small. I don't know." She smiled, a slow, kind thing. "Well, why don't you try the porridge today, and if you hate it, we'll try the eggs tomorrow. It's just breakfast, Julian. It's not a contract." That was the beginning. He stayed in Oakhaven for 2 weeks. He started small. He went to the local bookstore and realized he liked thrillers, not the historical biographies his mother always bought him. He realized he liked his coffee black, not with the 2 sugars and cream Elias always prepared for him. He realized he liked the sound of the ocean when it was angry. He called his best friend, Leo, from a payphone on the pier, his voice shaking. "I'm okay," he said, before Leo could scream. I'm learning how to breathe." Leo sighed, a sound of pure relief. "Elias hasn't looked for you, Jules. He told everyone to leave you alone. He's been quiet. I've never seen him like this. He's still working, still running the world, but he's different. Like he's waiting for a storm to pass." Julian hung up and cried for an hour. He missed Elias. He missed the scent of sandalwood and the way Elias's hand felt on the small of his back. But he knew that if he went back now, he would just fall back into the old patterns. He would be the agreeable Omega again, and the resentment would grow until it poisoned them both. He moved from the bed and breakfast to a small, drafty flat over a bakery in the city 2 weeks later. He got a job at a library, shelving books and helping old men find newspapers. He lived on a budget. He learned how to cook pasta. He learned that he was actually quite bad at gardening, but he liked the way the dirt felt under his fingernails. He read Elias's message every night before he went to sleep. 17 times a day sometimes. When you're ready, I'll be here. It was the first thing Elias had ever given him that wasn't a command disguised as a gift. It was a choice. While Julian was learning how to be a person, Elias was learning how to be a partner. He went to his therapist, a man who had seen him through the death of his father and the rise of his empire. I let him disappear, Elias said, his voice flat. I thought I was making his life easy. I thought I was giving him everything. But I was just taking up all the space. I never asked him what he wanted because he always seemed so happy to give me what I wanted. I was a tyrant of convenience. He spent his evenings in the penthouse, surrounded by the ghosts of a life they hadn't actually lived. He looked at the guest list for the wedding and realized he didn't know half the people on it. He looked at the menu and realized Julian had never once ordered the duck, yet it was the main course. He felt a profound, aching shame. He had loved Julian, but he hadn't known him. He had loved the idea of him, the perfect, graceful Omega who fit perfectly into the crook of his arm. He hadn't loved the man who might disagree with him, or the man who might want to live in a small flat over a bakery. 2 months and 11 days passed. The seasons shifted, the heat of the wedding morning giving way to the crisp, biting air of late autumn. Julian sat in his small flat, eating a bowl of pasta he had made himself. He looked around at the mismatched furniture and the stack of library books on the floor. He felt a strange, solid sense of peace. He knew what he liked. He knew what he hated. He knew that he was capable of surviving on his own. And he knew, with a clarity that made his heart ache, that he wanted to go home. But not to the old home. He wanted to go to Elias. He picked up the phone. His heart was beating fast, but it wasn't the frantic, trapped rhythm of the wedding morning. It was the steady, purposeful beat of a man making a choice. Elias answered on the second ring. Julian. His voice was rougher than Julian remembered, a little less polished. I know what I want, Julian said. He didn't say hello. He didn't apologize. He just spoke the truth. Elias was silent for a long moment. Tell me, he said softly. I want to be with you, Julian said, his voice clear. But I don't want to be the person I was. I don't want to say yes because I'm afraid of the silence. I want to be able to tell you when I'm angry. I want to be able to tell you when I want something else. I want to be a person, Elias. Not a reflection. I've spent 2 months finding out who that person is, and he's a bit messy. He likes cheap coffee and he's terrible at gardening. And he loves you. But he only loves you because he finally knows he has the option not to. Elias let out a breath, a sound that was half sob, half laugh. I need to tell you something too, Elias said. I was part of the pattern, Julian. I liked how easy you made it for me. I liked that I never had to compromise. I was a coward. I didn't want to see that you were fading away because it made my life more comfortable. I don't want the perfect Omega anymore. I want the man who ran away. I want the man who shelves books and eats bad pasta. I want you, Julian. All of you. Even the parts that disagree with me. Especially those parts. They met at a small, nondescript cafe the next day. No security, no fancy cars. Elias was wearing a simple sweater, his hair a little longer than usual. He smelled of sandalwood and rain. Julian wore his wool coat and smelled of white tea and the faint, sweet scent of the bakery below his flat. When they saw each other, they didn't run into each other's arms. They stood 5 feet apart and looked at each other. They were different people now. The silence between them wasn't heavy with expectation, it was light with possibility. Can we start over? Julian asked. Not from the beginning, Elias said, stepping closer. We know too much for that. But we can start from here. From today. They didn't move back into the penthouse immediately. Julian kept his flat for another month. They went on dates. Real dates, where they argued about which movie to see and what kind of food to eat. Elias learned that Julian hated lilies, he actually preferred wildflowers, the ones that looked a bit chaotic. Julian learned that Elias was actually quite insecure about his ability to be vulnerable, and that he used his power as a shield. They were slower now. They were less smooth. They had their first real argument 3 weeks in, about a chair Julian wanted to buy that Elias thought was hideous. It was the most beautiful moment of Julian's life. He stood his ground. He said, "I like it, Elias. I want it in the living room." And Elias had looked at him, surprised, then smiled and said, "Okay. Let's get the chair." It was a small thing, but it was everything. A year later, the world was different. They were living in a house they had chosen together, a place with a large garden that Julian was still failing to master, and a library that was filled with books they both actually read. The scent of the house was a blend of sandalwood and honey, a new scent that belonged only to them. One morning, Julian woke up feeling a strange, heavy warmth in his belly. His scent had changed, the honey was deeper, richer, with a creamy undertone that made his own head swim. He knew what it was before he even took the test. He sat on the edge of the bed, the same way he had on the wedding morning, but this time, he wasn't looking for an exit. He was looking for his partner. Elias came in with 2 mugs of coffee, black for Julian, just the way he liked it. He stopped in the doorway, his nostrils flaring. He could smell it too. The air in the room was thick with the scent of a new life, a sweet, golden aroma that made Elias's heart skip a beat. "Julian?" Elias asked, his voice hushed. Julian looked up, a slow smile spreading across his face. "I have something to tell you," he said. "But first, I want to ask you, what do you want?" Elias set the coffee down, his hands trembling slightly. He walked over and knelt between Julian's knees, resting his forehead against Julian's stomach. "I want whatever you want," he whispered. "No," Julian said, tilting Elias's chin up. "Not because I'm asking." "What do you want, Elias?" Elias looked into Julian's eyes, his own eyes wet with unshed tears. "I want this family. I want to raise a child with a man who had the courage to leave me so he could find himself. I want to see you become a father. That is my honest, selfish, deepest want." Julian nodded, his hand resting on Elias's hair. "Then we want the same thing. Because I want this too. This is the first time I've said yes and known it was mine." Elias pulled him into a hug, a deep, grounding embrace that felt like home. "I know," Elias whispered. "I've been waiting for that yes for a long time." They spent the rest of the morning in bed, talking about names and colors for a nursery, but this time, every decision was a conversation. There were no assumptions. There were no silent agreements. There was only the messy, beautiful reality of 2 people who had learned that love isn't about being perfect for each other, it's about being honest with each other. A few months later, they were sitting on the porch, watching the sun set over the garden. The air was cool, smelling of wood smoke and late-blooming jasmine. Julian was leaning back against Elias, his larger-than-usual stomach a comfortable weight. Elias was tracing patterns on Julian's palm. "I'm going to ask you something eventually," Elias said softly, his voice vibrating against Julian's back. "And I need you to know that I want your actual answer, not the one that seems right." Julian smiled, closing his eyes. "I know, Elias." The alpha shifted, his arms tightening around Julian. "Do you know what your answer will be?" Julian took a breath, feeling the life stirring inside him, feeling the solid, unshakable foundation of the life he had built for himself. "Yes," he said. "I know." Elias leaned forward, his lips brushing Julian's ear. "Is it yours?" Julian turned his head, looking at the man who had waited for him, the man who had given him the space to become a person. "It is completely, entirely mine," Julian said. "Then I'll ask when the time is right," Elias said. Julian laughed, a bright, clear sound that echoed in the quiet evening. "The time is right now, Elias. I'm ready." Elias pulled a small box from his pocket, not the massive diamond from before, but a simple gold band with a single, small sapphire the color of the ocean in Oakhaven. "Julian, will you marry me? Not as a contract, not as a social obligation, but as my partner." Julian looked at the ring, then at Elias. He didn't think about his mother. He didn't think about the family reputation. He didn't think about what was expected of him. He thought about the 2 months in the cold flat. He thought about the black coffee and the bad pasta. He thought about the man who had sent a message saying, "I am not angry." "Yes," Julian said. And for the first time in his life, the word didn't feel like a weight. It felt like wings. The wedding was small. It was held in the garden of their house, with only a handful of people, Leo, Mrs. Gable from Oakhaven, and a few friends they had made together. There were no lilies. There were wildflowers everywhere, tucked into jars and braided into the hair of the few guests. Julian wore a simple linen suit that didn't feel like a shroud. He walked down the grass aisle, his footsteps light. When he reached Elias, he didn't look at the guests. He only looked at the man standing in front of him. Elias took his hands, his scent of sandalwood and rain now mixed with the warm, golden scent of their shared life. "I, Elias, take you, Julian, to be my partner," Elias said, his voice steady. "To listen when you speak, to respect when you disagree, and to love you for exactly who you are, not who I want you to be." Julian smiled, his eyes bright. "And I, Julian, take you, Elias, to be my partner. To speak my truth, even when it's hard, to choose you every day, and to never again say yes unless I mean it from the bottom of my soul." They didn't need a grand reception. They had a dinner of pasta and wine, and they danced under the stars to a song they both actually liked. As the night wound down, Julian stood by the fence, looking out at the dark trees. He felt a hand on his shoulder, and he didn't need to turn to know it was Elias. "You okay?" Elias whispered. Julian leaned back into him, the scent of his alpha wrapping around him like a blanket. "I'm more than okay," Julian said. "I'm here." Elias kissed the top of his head. "I know. And I'm never letting go of the man who had the strength to leave." They went inside, the house quiet and warm. The phone on the sideboard buzzed, a message from Julian's mother, likely complaining about the lack of press at the wedding. Julian didn't even pick it up. He just turned it over, the screen dark. He didn't need to answer every call anymore. He only needed to answer the ones that mattered. And as he climbed into bed next to Elias, he knew that the only voice he needed to hear was the one he had finally found within himself. The morning after the wedding was quiet. No frantic schedules, no social obligations. Just the two of them, waking up in a room that smelled of sunlight and peace. Julian watched Elias sleep for a moment, noting the small lines around his eyes that hadn't been there a year ago, the lines of a man who had learned how to worry about someone other than himself. When Elias opened his eyes, he smiled, a slow, genuine thing. "Good morning, husband," Elias said. Julian laughed, the words still sounding new and wonderful. "Good morning." They stayed in bed for a long time, talking about nothing and everything. Julian told Elias about a book he wanted to read, and Elias told Julian about a project he was working on that he actually wanted Julian's opinion on. It wasn't a performance. It was a life. And as Julian got up to make the coffee black for both of them, he caught his reflection in the mirror. He didn't see a series of negotiations. He didn't see a well-maintained asset. He saw a man with messy hair and tired eyes and a heart that was finally, truly full. He saw Julian. And that was more than enough. The years that followed were not perfect. They had more arguments. They had days where they didn't understand each other. They had the exhaustion of a newborn and the stress of a changing world. But they never went back to the silence. They never went back to the agreeable yes. Every conflict was a bridge, not a wall. Every disagreement was a chance to see each other more clearly. When their son was born, he smelled of honey and sandalwood, a perfect blend of the two of them. They named him Oliver, after the town where Julian had found his breath. And as Julian held the baby for the first time, he looked at Elias and saw not a king on a throne, but a father with tears in his eyes. "Do you want to hold him?" Julian asked. Elias reached out, his hand steady and sure. "More than anything," he said. And Julian knew, without a shadow of a doubt, that it was the truth. Because in this house, in this life, they didn't say things because they were supposed to. They said them because they were true. The phone on the nightstand rang, a call from the office, but Elias didn't even look at it. He just kept his eyes on his son and his husband. The world could wait. The empire could wait. The only thing that mattered was the quiet, honest breath of the people in this room. Julian leaned his head on Elias's shoulder, the scent of his family surrounding him. He thought back to the wedding morning, to the heavy silk and the suffocating lilies. He thought about the boy who had run away because he didn't know how to stay. He was grateful for that boy. He was grateful for the fear and the confusion and the 2 months of bad posture. Because without them, he never would have found this. He never would have found the strength to say the only yes that ever mattered. The one that was his. And as the sun rose higher, casting long, golden shadows across the floor, Julian closed his eyes and let out a long, slow breath. He was home. He was whole. And he was finally, truly, himself. The end of the beginning had passed, and the rest of their lives was waiting, a blank page that they would fill together, one honest word at a time. Elias shifted the baby in his arms, his gaze never leaving Julian's face. "You're thinking again," he murmured, a small smile playing on his lips. "I am," Julian admitted. "What about?" Elias asked, his voice a low rumble of affection. "About how lucky I am that I ran away," Julian said. Elias's expression softened, his thumb brushing the baby's cheek. "Me too, Julian. Me too. If you hadn't, I'd still be a man who had everything and understood nothing. You saved us both." Julian took Elias's hand, their fingers interlocking. "We saved each other," he corrected. And that was the final truth of it. They had dismantled the cage they had both been living in, and they had built something better in its place. Something real. Something that could weather any storm. As the baby stirred, letting out a soft, tiny cry, Julian reached out to take him back, his movements graceful and sure. It was time for the day to start. It was time for the beautiful, messy, wonderful work of being a family. And as they walked out of the bedroom together, the scent of honey and sandalwood followed them, a lingering reminder of the choice they had made to be honest, to be vulnerable, and to be together on their own terms. The house was full of light, and for the first time in his life, Julian didn't feel the need to fill the silence with an agreeable yes. He just smiled at his husband, and the silence was enough. It was more than enough. It was everything. They walked down the stairs, their footsteps echoing in the quiet house, a steady, rhythmic sound that spoke of a life well lived and a love well earned. The garden was waiting outside, messy and chaotic and full of life, just like them. And as Julian looked out at the wildflowers swaying in the breeze, he knew that he wouldn't change a single second of the journey that had brought him here. Every missed call, every lonely night, every difficult conversation, it had all been worth it. Because he was no longer a ghost. He was a man who knew what he wanted. And what he wanted was right here, in the curve of Elias's arm and the weight of the baby in his own. He was home. And for the first time, he knew exactly why. The sun climbed higher in the sky, warming the earth and bringing the scent of the garden into the house. It was a good day. It was a new day. And it was theirs. Julian felt a surge of gratitude so strong it took his breath away. He looked at Elias, who was watching him with that same quiet pride, but this time, it wasn't the pride of an owner. It was the pride of a partner. "I love you," Julian said, the words simple and profound. "I love you too," Elias replied. And they both knew, without a doubt, that it was the truest thing they had ever said. The world outside continued to turn, with its noise and its expectations and its endless demands, but inside the walls of their home, there was only the truth. There was only the love they had built from the ruins of their old lives. And as they sat down to breakfast, eggs today, because that was what Julian had decided he wanted, they knew that they had everything they needed. They had each other. They had their son. And they had the freedom to choose their own way, every single day. Julian took a sip of his coffee, the bitter warmth grounding him. He looked at the empty chair where a guest might have sat, and he felt a sense of peace. They didn't need guests. They didn't need a performance. They just needed this. This quiet, honest life. And as the morning turned into afternoon, and the afternoon into evening, they continued to build their story, one choice at a time. A story that wasn't about a perfect wedding or a grand empire, but about two people who had the courage to be real. And that was the most beautiful story of all. Julian leaned back in his chair, watching Elias play with the baby. He felt a sense of contentment that he had never known was possible. He was no longer waiting for his life to start. He was living it. And as the stars began to twinkle in the night sky, he knew that he was exactly where he was meant to be. He was Julian. He was a father. He was a husband. And he was free. The journey had been long and difficult, but it had led him to the only place that mattered. It had led him home. And as he closed his eyes, listening to the soft sounds of his family, he knew that he would never take a single moment of it for granted. Because he knew the cost of a life lived for others, and he knew the value of a life lived for himself. And he knew that the greatest gift he had ever been given was the chance to say no, so that he could finally, truly say yes. The end of the story was just the beginning of their life, and it was a life that Julian was proud to call his own. He reached out and took Elias's hand, their fingers intertwining in the dark. "I'm glad I came back," he whispered. "I'm glad you did too," Elias whispered back. And as they sat there in the quiet, they knew that they were ready for whatever came next. Because they were doing it together, and they were doing it for themselves. And that was all that mattered. The scent of sandalwood and honey lingered in the air, a sweet, steady reminder of the love they had found. And as the moon rose over the garden, casting a silver light over the wildflowers, Julian finally fell asleep, a smile on his lips and a sense of peace in his heart. He was home. He was loved. And he was finally, truly, free. The silence was no longer something to be feared. It was something to be shared. And in that sharing, they had found everything they had ever been looking for. The story of the Omega who left was over, and the story of the man who stayed had begun. And it was a story that would last a lifetime. Every morning, every evening, every breath, it was all a part of the beautiful, messy, wonderful life they had chosen. And as the sun rose on another day, Julian knew that he would choose it all over again. Every single time. Because it was his. And that was the most important thing of all. The cream-colored silk was long gone, replaced by the soft, worn cotton of a life lived well. The lilies were gone, replaced by the wild, chaotic beauty of a garden that was loved. And the silence was gone, replaced by the honest, open communication of two people who had found their voices. Julian was no longer a reflection. He was a man. And he was happy. Truly, deeply, honestly happy. And as he walked into the kitchen to start the day, he knew that he had everything he had ever wanted. He had himself. And he had Elias. And that was more than enough. It was everything. He looked out the window at the rising sun, the light reflecting off the sapphire on his finger. It was a beautiful day. It was a day for new beginnings. It was a day for choices. And as Elias walked into the room, smelling of sandalwood and fresh morning air, Julian smiled. "What do you want for breakfast?" he asked. Elias laughed, pulling him into a hug. "Whatever you're having," he said. Julian shook his head, his smile widening. "No, Elias. Tell me what you want." Elias looked at him, his eyes full of love. "I want you," he said. And Julian nodded. "Good," he said. "Because that's exactly what I want too." And they sat down together, two people who had found their way back to each other, not because they had to, but because they chose to. And as they ate their breakfast in the quiet, sunlight-filled kitchen, they knew that their story was just getting started. And it was going to be a good one. A very, very good one. The end was just the beginning, and the beginning was everything they had ever dreamed of. They were together. They were honest. They were home. And they were finally, truly, happy. The scent of honey and sandalwood filled the room, a sweet, steady reminder of the life they had built. And as the day unfolded before them, they walked into it together, hand in hand, ready for whatever came next. Because they knew that as long as they had each other, and as long as they were honest, they could handle anything. And that was the greatest truth of all. Julian felt a deep sense of peace as he watched his husband and son. He knew that the path he had taken was the right one. He knew that the pain and the fear had been necessary. Because they had led him here. To this moment. To this life. And he wouldn't change a thing. He was exactly where he was meant to be. And he was exactly who he was meant to be. And that was the most beautiful thing of all. The story was complete, and yet it was just beginning. And Julian couldn't wait to see what happened next. Because for the first time in his life, he was the one writing the story. And he was going to make it a masterpiece. One honest word at a time. One honest choice at a time. One honest yes at a time. And as the sun reached its peak, casting a warm, golden glow over everything, Julian took a deep breath and smiled. Life was good. Life was very, very good. And he was ready for all of it. Every single moment. Every single breath. Every single yes. Because it was all his. And that was all that mattered. He looked at Elias, and he saw the man he loved. He looked at his son, and he saw the future. And he looked at himself, and he saw a man who was finally, truly, free. And that was the greatest gift of all. The end of the beginning had passed, and the rest of their lives was waiting. And Julian was ready. He was more than ready. He was home. And he was happy. Truly, deeply, honestly happy. And as he walked into the future with his family by his side, he knew that everything was going to be okay. Because they were doing it together. And they were doing it for themselves. And that was the most important thing of all. The scent of honey and sandalwood lingered in the air, a sweet, steady reminder of the love they had found. And as the day turned into evening, and the evening into night, they continued to build their life, one choice at a time. A life that was theirs. A life that was real. A life that was beautiful. And as Julian finally fell asleep, he knew that he had everything he had ever wanted. He was home. He was loved. And he was finally, truly, himself. And that was the most beautiful story of all. The end.